Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Hard Hats and High Tech, the podcast where we explore the insights, innovations, and strategies shaping the world of modern construction. I'm your host, Bernardita Calzon, and in today's episode, we are discussing one of the most important and often overlooked processes in the construction project lifecycle: specification writing. To help us understand how technology is reshaping this space, I'm joined by Eric Letbetter, an experienced specifier and the founder of LetbetterInk.com. Eric has been using RIB SpecLink to streamline his workflow and bring greater clarity and consistency to his specs. From reducing errors to better collaboration with design teams, we'll hear how Eric's day-to-day has changed, what features he relies on the most, and why he thinks specifiers should move from tools like Word and spreadsheets into platforms like RIB SpecLink. Hi, Eric. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for joining me today.
Glad to do it. Happy to be here.
What we usually do is we ask our guests to introduce themselves a little bit, tell us what you do and why you are here today.
Okay. So I am trained as an architect. I practiced for approximately 31 years in the corporate world as both an architect and a specifier. It was with one company, and so I started out building models and doing all the things that a young designer would do, and moved into project architect role and the project manager, principal, and a partner there, and was developing it sort of fell into spec writings like a lot of people that do what I do, and got to a point in my career where it just felt right to go take off on my own and start my own thing. It just felt right. It was time to grow a little bit more. So took a chance.
So now you have your own firm?
I have my own specification writing firm. I only write specs now. I still keep and maintain my license to practice architecture, but my practice is specifically focused on specification consulting, and I do that. That shows up in a couple different ways. It shows up as a spec writer. It shows up as teaching in a couple different ways. And some of those go from workshops, sophisticated workshops to help people, sort of take their specs to the next level. It comes to basic teaching and training, and then there's some of the sort of mid-level, like I call it leveraging it's actually all targeted around RIB, the RIB spec technology, and so it's sort of taking all those things that SpecLink can do and then showing other people how to do it and how I use it to streamline my processes and trying to help people duplicate that system for them. And so and then from the spec writing world, I will do things both on their platform using the collaboration tool for people that want to maintain control and hold on to their content and use it to grow their own in the future. And then I have my own specification consulting that I do independently of them. But and I've got a couple different models or a couple different use cases for both inviting someone that does know SpecLink but isn't using it on the project to comment and collaborate, to just sending them raw PDFs and raw data and sharing documents and comment reports and all the other things that SpecLink can do. And so I work in a couple different environments.
Wow, yeah, that sounds really interesting, and I can see that we have a lot to talk about then.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basics. So how did you first came across SpecLink, and what made you go into it?
I was introduced to SpecLink in its early stages when it was BSD and sort of the early, Rob Dean era. And so it was a very different platform, and I wasn't actually using it to author specs. I used it as a project architect when I was executing or enforcing construction phase services for a project where my project manager at the time wrote the specs on SpecLink. And so it wasn't used firm-wide. They had sort of used it as a test pilot. It disappeared for a while. It didn't really take foot in the firm. And I think that was a couple of reasons for that. One of them being there wasn't a champion of that change going on. And so I got reintroduced to it probably in the 2012, 2013 era. I got introduced to it. It had changed quite a bit since I had first seen the products, the output alone, and it was significantly more abbreviated than the competitors spec. But that didn't bother me. In fact, I liked it because it was a little bit shorter. It was a little bit easier to read, and it was a little more direct. And so I liked it enough that, and I was involved enough in spec writing specs at that point using Word files and sort of a curated Office master that had probably at that time, probably 35 years of institutional knowledge baked into the system. And so trying to figure out a way to merge those two worlds was a little bit of a task. And so I just took it upon myself to run some test projects and be the champion of that software. And so I ran a couple of test pilot projects where I imported some stuff, I copied some stuff, I started with the RIB content and baked in some other things. And so it became this process of blending those two systems, and it evolved into a complete migration over to SpecLink, over to SpecLink E. And then we migrated, that firm migrated over to cloud full time in 2021. And so that literally started out, and I mean that was probably an 8 year process then to go from my initial test project of SpecLink to where the cloud is now. There were probably some in between cycles where the firm was using, not producing all their specs internally, even still. But we were headed in that direction. The funny story that I like to tell is that I made a use case scenario to justify purchasing the initial license of SpecLink based on the hours that we were going to save just by changing the footer in Word files. So if you're writing specs and you're doing Word files, you could have, anywhere between, let's say, 80 and 120 sections, right? Of your stuff. And so you have to open that many files, change the footer, and then save it, print it, do all the things. And that happens in the developer world. So in the private sector, that can happen a lot. So there's an issuance, the name changes sometimes on those projects a couple of times. So you have to reissue the documents sometimes. And so, it would not have been unreasonable to have an average of 3 footer changes on any one project. And so if you scale that and multiply it out, that process alone, I ran the math using the hourly rate of someone, and it more than paid for itself in that regard. And so that was at least the use case.
That's a really good way of putting it.
So it was a fun little project to fight for.
Okay, so it sounds like you're really an expert in SpecLink, and that you have also been a really big part of the development of the tool. So considering that, can you describe maybe a typical day of you using SpecLink and what kind of tasks you're doing there?
Yeah, so if I'm using SpecLink, I use it. I'm trying to figure out ways to use it for other things. I was introduced to the idea of using it for proposals from a colleague, and that was a total game changer for me. I developed an ad service request form, and sort of went from there and started to use it for other things. And it's so in terms of that and using it for other things, it's got some automated formatting features that sort of give you this really easy way to add and delete and remove things. So conceptually, from a spec, think about a document with links, and some content is on and some content is off. And so from a content creation standpoint, you basically have a template that can hold on to different versions of text that you like to do. If it's a if it's a proposal for spec writing and it's this way, and it's, I'm going to be teaching it a workshop this way. And so that's a different set of articles that I can turn on, and then it automatically turns off all the other stuff. So there's some really cool things that you can do with the software once you start to think, oh, I can use this for other documents too. So that's sort of one way I use it. So I'm writing proposals in it. I'm using it to write. I'm just using the table of contents sometimes to do a quick scope of work. I have a couple of different ways to do that, but I've done it both ways in a test. If I'm doing projects, I'm in the software. I'm in all parts of the software. I'm importing stuff. I'm using the template. I'm making my own. Working on my template. I'm working on the masters at the same time. I'm commenting on things. I'm usually in a couple of different projects, but I don't always get to do it this way. But as I make changes in a project, what I like to do is open up my master at the same time and go back and make the edits so that I don't forget, and I don't just do a dumb overwrite of the master with a new version unless it's absolutely necessary.
Okay, that's interesting. So you mentioned before that you are writing a lot of specs, and you also mentioned all of these features from SpecLink, like automated links and all of that. So when you switched to SpecLink, what did you notice that changed the most in your spec writing?
So I think it was the speed at which you can build something up pretty quickly. I think there was there's some decisions that are sort of baked into there that sort of make for a starting point template that a traditional, starting with a Microsoft Word file or whatever document you have, unless you've got baked in instructions or a separate sheet. And back, I remember a time when there was a separate sheet, an instruction sheet that came with the Word file. And so it said, it had all these instructions in there. And then those files got a little more sophisticated where there was hidden text, there's hidden text in Microsoft Word. And so in terms of preserving the institutional knowledge, once you change some of that stuff or delete it, it's gone. Right. And so I think my favorite part of SpecLink was I can have all these automated features in. I can keep institutional knowledge there and always know without much work what the original text was. I can add stuff. I can modify stuff. It's just the flexibility of it is unlike anything I used before to produce this kind of work. I mean, we use templates. AutoCAD has templates and things, and I used hidden text and hidden lines to in AutoCAD to line stuff up, and so it sort of felt a little bit like having this background layer that I could sort of play with and set up things and keep things on and preserve them digitally without having to have an output or give it to someone else. And so that the next time someone else opens that file, they see the same thing I do, without having to remember all the stuff that I remember.
Yeah. Well, then we can say that the specification writing process is completely enhanced with SpecLink. You mentioned reducing the manual work and not losing all of these sections that are super important when you want to erase them from a project. And also these like smart links help avoid errors and omissions, which I think it's also like a big challenge when it comes to specification writing. When you're missing like one part, then it can mess up the whole project. So could you maybe explain a little bit more how these it's like, I don't know how to call them, like sections that you can turn on and off, how this works in SpecLink?
So a specification is typically divided into three. It's a three-part CSI specification, and there's a part one, which is mostly the administrative aspects, which is submittals, quality control that the contractor has to do, submittals, etc. Part two is the stuff; it's all the things, and then part three is the execution; it's the how. And so SpecLink is it's really set up to go in and let you pick the things. And then from there, the links drive choices or decisions that are made in part one and choices that are made in part three. And sometimes for the newer spec writer, or someone getting started, or even when you're advanced, are you the choices becomes like, am I picking up all the things that I'm asking the contractor to do on an execution side based on the choices I make in the front. So if I've got a mechanically fastened air barrier system, that's got different execution requirements than if I'm using a fluid applied. And so the automation can help you, sort of in the change, right? So, hey, we're not going to use a fluid applied anymore. We're going to go to a mechanically attached. So I can make that change in part 2. I'll still check it, but with confidence, it sort of gives me a different set of parameters that I don't have to go back in and type a bunch of stuff. There's a template there, and I can go back and, if that makes sense, I can go back and sort of look at a different set of parameters that are driven in part 3.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that's really good.
different sections talk to each other, and so there's some intelligence built in there that lets you sort of fix, remind you to fix things, but it sometimes helps you, and it sometimes will help take things out. So if you've removed something, it'll turn something off in part 3 because you turned it off in part 2, and maybe that was this one little paragraph buried somewhere else in there, and you don't need that anchor there anymore because you took it out. And so it takes it out of the installing the anchors in part 3 or whatever it ends up doing. So
so the time saving is huge.
Yeah, I think so.
And also the mental work, because you don't need to be like so sure that you erased it yourself. Like it gets deleted automatically. So that's efficiency.
Yeah.
Really, really efficient. Now, I know another challenge with spec writing is staying up to date with codes or the new materials, the prices, and everything. So, how do you manage these updates in SpecLink?
RIB is really good about updating their sections. I'm pretty sure they have someone that's just dedicated to just keeping up with all the standards, which is, it's quite a task if you really go through and think about every reference standard and every code and every manufacturers association. That just to keep up with that alone is a task that's very. If I had to do that myself, that would be crazy. ASTM changes their standards frequently. One of the things that I do in my specs is, which the software allows you to do it. It allows you to make the choices. Do I want to include the date of that reference standard? Right? Do I want to include the date, or do I not want to include it? The cool part is I choose to not print the date, because the standard usually is the number stays the same for me. And so I want it to be the active standard as of the issuance date, right? Whatever the publication date of the spec book, I want that date to match. And so I just tell SpecLink, don't print the date. But inside the software, I can still see it. I know what it is. And so it lets me check. So if I'm checking consultant documents and I see that they've got the date in there, I can sort of tell if it's correct or not. But I also want to encourage them to turn that off, because it may not be the active standard. The other part that I like is that there's a confidence I have in the manufacturers that are listed. It's not a list of 15 or it's not a list of 15 or 20. It's a curated list of, every time I say that with, based on every time I go to a manufacturer that's listed, they have what I'm looking for in that section. So it's vetted. It's not just a random, it's not just a random company name in there. They match they match the content of the section that they're in. And so that's a big time saver in terms of finding those things. The only caveat there that gets tricky for me, that I have to pay a little bit more attention to, is regional things. So those a lot of those material choices, or those manufacturers are, most of them are national, right? So they're the they're the big ones. But sometimes you have to really think about, is that a regional? Is that manufactured over on the West Coast? There's a particular window manufacturer. I remember that I had a meeting with them, and I'm over here in the Southeast United States, and at the time they didn't ship their product past east of Texas, and so they were you just leave them off. But I knew that, and then I could make a note in the at that point I learned that I can put that note in the system so that the person that comes behind me knows, like, hey, if you're east of Texas, they don't ship east of Texas. And so there's some tools in there that combined together help you preserve the institutional knowledge, and ultimately I think get to a more reasonable vetted list of product manufacturers as well.
Okay, and what about for these regional projects that you mentioned that maybe you don't have the information? You're allowed to import your own data, right? Like have your own regional specific list and everything. Can you speak a little bit about how you do that?
It's just it's just a hard return and add a new line. I mean, I know, for example, if I know what my window manufacturers are, and for Florida, it's just a hard return, and I add a new line to the manufacturers list. It's just a simple manual edit tool.
Nothing too complicated.
No. It's super easy.
Okay, that's great. Now, collaboration is a huge topic here too, in the spec management world. So what has changed in terms of collaboration for you with SpecLink? So how do you interact with other team members within the platform and everything?
Yeah, so now that I'm on my own, I'm a one person firm. I don't have any employees. I don't plan on having any employees, but I have did work with others in the corporate world, and so setting up those templates and being able to just be able to go in and open a project and look pretty quickly and see what someone is doing is pretty fantastic. But the biggest game changer recently has been the commenting feature inside of SpecLink, where I can literally tag a client and they get an email. I can ask them a question. They can open the software and they can look at the content in context. And I don't have to print a PDF, and I don't have to email it to them, or so the commenting feature takes them right to it. It's been really super helpful to collaborate that way. Alternately, there is an export feature to Excel. You can take all the comments and you can export them to Excel. So if you have a client that doesn't want to get emailed every time you do a comment and tag them, they're going to get an email. So, the workaround there is you don't tag them. Right now you don't tag them. You generate an Excel report and you email it out to them. It's got all this stuff in there. So there's a couple of different ways to collaborate like that. But it's been a game changer in terms of getting client feedback quickly and live in the data. Like they can actually see what it looks like in context with all the other stuff.
And I think they can access it even without having like a SpecLink license, right? Like you can still share.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay, that's
and there
good.
are the other use case is I'm writing specs on someone else's system, and so I'm a contributing editor, and so I'll edit it on their system, and I can tag them because they have licensed users. I can tag them and they can go in and look at it and comment. And so it's a really good way as an outside consultant working inside someone else's system to engage the client's project team and sort of help them grow and learn the process, and maybe get a sneak peek into how a spec writer thinks and the things that we're looking for. So for me, with a goal of trying to train my replacements, right? I'm trying to train people. I'm trying to make this easier for folks. It's a the collaboration tool alone is a great teaching tool to help other people plug in.
Yeah, that's a different perspective. Like to use it for teaching in your case, it's a really, really good use case that we didn't see so far. So that's interesting. Now, you have mentioned a couple of features that you like from SpecLink, but you have been using it for so long that I wanted to ask you if you have like one particular feature that you couldn't live without within the software.
Oh, I'm sure it's the linking engine. Like that thing is crazy.
Okay.
The capabilities of that are ridiculous. Um, the automation that you can build in, the pre-editing you can do to speed up your processes and set things up for project type. I can set up a template by project. I can set up a spec to edit it. I could to edit it 3 different ways. I could say, okay, this is a multi-family. When I do this section for multifamily, it looks like this. When I do it for aviation, it looks like this. When I do it for healthcare, it looks like this. And I can pre-edit. I can go through my master. I can edit all those things, and with one click, I can go back. I mean, granted, I've edited, so I've written this thing 3 times, right? But then I can go back and automate it so that the next time I need to make that edit, I can make that edit by project type. And then I'm 95% of the way there, and then I can balance out so that I'm doing most of the heavy lifting I've done in my processes before, and then I can leverage those. I can leverage that time then to sort of give me the balance of work that I have to do is less, and it becomes a lot more about quality control, and it becomes a more focused task on making sure that I'm matching this with this project instead of having to look at the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's my favorite one. Don't take it
So
away.
you can spend less time scanning and actually manipulating content and actually focusing on improving and making
Yeah,
decisions.
right. Getting it
So
right for that project.
yeah, that's a really, really valuable feature, I think, too. Now, now we can dive into a little bit into your teaching aspect that you mentioned. So what advice would you give to a specifier still using traditional tools like Word or spreadsheets for their specs?
So just pick a pilot project. You don't have to do it all at once. Get in, just sort of get your hands dirty. I've always been a get in there and try something new. I was a software guinea pig. I was always trying the new software. So I was never afraid. I was never afraid to do that. So for me, it wasn't difficult to jump into a new software and try something different and figure out how it works. But I think if you just go through, just give it a try, pick a test pilot project if you're thinking about making the transition. And you don't want to engage someone on the outside. If you're a seasoned spec writer, give it a shot. And I think the seasoned spec writers, people that understand how to put together a project manual, will be very quick to jump on it once they get their hands on it and can see it and can understand the decisions that they're capable of making. If they just get in and give it a try.
So don't be afraid of the technology. Like everyone
No,
sometimes is so afraid of
right,
diving into new platforms.
right, yeah,
That's good advice. So hopefully we'll see more people transitioning into tools like SpecLink because as you told us, they are really good for time saving and increased efficiency and all of that. So thank you for
yeah.
this conversation. It has been really, really interesting.
You're
And
welcome.
yeah, for our listeners, we'll be back with another episode very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.